Good morning. It's now my pleasure to again welcome back Dr. Stephen Morgan, the Research Agricultural Economist with the International Trade and Development Branch in the Market and Trade Economics Division of the USDA Economic Research Service. So welcome to session 4. Stephen, I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Martha. Welcome back, everyone, for day 2 of our conference on agricultural policy, economics, and diverse farms and farmers. Like Martha mentioned, this is session 4. And today we have 4 great research presentations focused at sort of the intersection of diversity with market forces, in particular market demand and supply. So I really quickly just want to highlight our 4 speakers. So we're going to have Ervin, Maria, Logan, and Lan. And Ervin, I will pass it off to you to start.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is an exciting opportunity to show part of my research. So I'll be talking about the barriers Latinx farmers face to enter markets in the Midwest. Then this was a mixed methods study. So let's see why this is relevant, okay? There's been an increase of Latinx, which cover Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin farm operators of about 13%, per the latest data from the agricultural census, okay? So this increase is larger for these guys, okay? Almost 7% compared to their farm operators. Latinx farmers are occupying over 112,000. There are over 112,000 farmers. They use about 32 million acres, and they're selling about 22 million worth of ag products. About 60% of these farmers are in Texas, California, and New Mexico. And at the time when I did my research, Missouri was number 10th in the country. So the qualitative part of the study focused on understanding the roles that cultures and acculturation, I'll go over what acculturation is later, played in decreasing the barriers faced by Midwestern Latinx farmers, both from the Latinx farmers' perspectives and experiences, as well as those of service providers, private service providers, and publics. And then the quantitative part focused on estimating the transaction costs these farmers face to enter markets and sell their ag products. And as you saw, this group of farmers are the fastest growing minority of farm operators in the US. So what is the problem here? What was the motivation to do this research? We saw the increase of these Latinx farmers. So the need to understand how they enter farming, the need to determine the links to their existing institutions and organizations in the US, and the values, beliefs, motivations they had for farming, which cannot be only profit maximization in this case. And with that in mind, understand the key capacity of key stakeholders to serve these farmers and understand the pathways that they use to transition into becoming profitable farmers. There were interviews and focus groups with the actual farmers and as well with public and private sector providers. This qualitative research informed the development of a survey instrument for data collection. I had 124 households from Missouri and Michigan, and during COVID, we couldn't cover Iowa. So let's start with the qualitative analysis. This is the framework I used. Basically, I had 7 steps. Step 1 was the theory and research questions, followed by collection, interview, initial codes, and some of analysis. Then I tagged and labeled my data. Then I use charts. I sort the charts, and then it was sense making of the data. And then I had teams and sub teams that began to emerge. And during that process, I was constantly doing some holistic vetting of my data. So let's move on to the findings. Okay, the main themes. I found that there is a limited connection between service providers and Latinx farmers. These two groups have different farming cultures. Latinx farmers have diverse livelihood strategies compared to mainstream farmers. Let's dig a little bit into more details to bring more context into these main themes. Okay. So bridging the gap between service providers and Latinx farmers. Okay. I found that there was cultural misunderstandings, okay, a divide rooted in cultural barriers and misconceptions between these two groups. There was an awareness gap. Service providers lack knowledge of Latinx farmers' presence and needs. For instance, one service provider said, "Don't know Latinx, don't know where they live, don't know where they come from. I really didn't know that there were a lot of Hispanic farmers at all." There are mistrust issues, okay? Latinx farmers are skeptical of farmer services and institutions. They come from a different field of farming in Latin America. They come to the US with different institutions, different markets, incentives. So a service provider said, when you mention anything that has to do with putting their things in black and white paper, they just kind of shy away from it until they get that trust, okay? Doing banking in Latin America is different, okay? So there's that mistrust, okay? Different institutions at play. So some of the key challenges are difference in time management practices, preference for informal networks over formal financial institutions, and lack of farmers' trust in services, okay? We're talking about two different cultures, a high context culture from Latin America and a low context culture here in the US. Okay, so that's understanding culture is quite important. So just talk a little bit about cultures. So understand diverse cultures, okay? I just mentioned how that these different cultures can become a clash, and they're shaped by different historical events and institutions. Okay, a higher context culture like Latin America, a community and sense of belonging is very important. Okay, when you go to a meeting with an extension agent, you know, it's okay to talk about your family and to relax, okay? If you are an Anglo farmer, you go to an extension, you go down to business, okay? So there is less relational, okay? One service provider said, I think that culturally, they would rather tell you yes to something and not to it because they don't want to disappoint you. Farmers. A farmer said, we offer our services with poor English, but we offer it anyways to the city, to the police, the sheriff, the hospital. We would interpret for free. So understanding culture is quite important to overcome these barriers and getting messages across. And trust is like, it buffers the creation of other capitals. Without trust, other capitals cannot grow. And then moving to the last theme, diverse livelihood strategies that these farmers have to engage into farming. We found that the way these Latinx farmers work, you know, they use social capital within family members to borrow and buy small pieces of land, you know, 4 acres here, 10 acres down the road, Okay, they don't go to financial institutions. Okay, and so their livelihoods are built differently. They're not only small, but they differ to compared to the average small Anglo farmer and conventional farmers. Okay, so there are support gaps. Service providers lack of understanding of these strategies can become a barrier to serve these Latinx farmers. Service provider said they own 10 acres here and half a mile down they have 20 acres. It's like a puzzle because it's difficult to make that work, but that's how they can grow slowly because they borrow through social capital. And aspiration versus knowledge, Latinx farmers have dreams. They dream about non-conventional farming and they want to grow, but they don't know how to do it. Okay. One farmer said, I have a small farm. In the future, I would like to plant everything organic. That would be my dream, but I don't know where to start. Okay. So, I summarized an entire study in just a few minutes, but just to give you some takeaways. So let's move to the quantitative analysis. Let's review a little bit about information asymmetry and market exchange costs. Okay, we already know that there are no winners when there is asymmetry. Either buyers or sellers, are going to suffer. That's not good. So cost of tradings can include bargaining, contracting, monitoring, enforcing agreements. And when there are price differences, larger farmers are generally favored with higher prices compared to smaller farmers. So that leads to going over transaction costs. Proportional transaction costs are going to change, are going to influence by the amount of output. And fixed transaction costs are going to stay the same regardless of the amount that is produced. But there are implications for small farmers, okay? So both proportional and fixed transaction costs are going to influence their decision to engage into a market, okay? So both are going to influence if they decide to sell or not. But only proportional transaction costs are going to influence how much they're selling in the market. So let's go over the model that I use. I use the Heckman model. The first step is just a probit model with a selection equation, and that included the factors hypothesized to influence the likelihood of market participation. My dependent variable was market participation for yes or no, okay? And then in the equation, you can see the variables. Step 2 was the outcome equation. These are the factors hypothesized to influence the amount of agricultural sales, okay? So the dependent variable was the quantity of agricultural products sold. And here are the variables that went into that equation. The descriptive stats, okay? The log of investment in agriculture. I had to transform this variable, it was so, I had so different amounts, okay? Some had a few had larger investment in agriculture, so I had some outliers, but most of them were very small farmers. The amount of trainings and information received on ag production, okay? Anglo acculturation, that's an index of the amount of time spent watching TV, listening to the radio, the amount of time they engage speaking English, which is very important because that's how they can access market information, which is in English. And Spanish acculturation, you may wonder, so this guy speaks Spanish, so why an index? But their level of education is on average 5 years. So sometimes they cannot read properly or understand information in Spanish. So the little information that is translated into Spanish from the extension office, if it is given to them, they're not going to make sense out of it. So the amount of time that spent reading, or their ability to understand written and oral Spanish, their age. Ours work on a farm per week, where they had a business plan for their operation, quantity of acres planted, number of employees, log of personal and household income. Okay, I have to put these two variables together to inform on theory. Okay, they borrowed among family members, so they're going to combine their personal and household income. And the perception of where they are welcome in a community, where they hire labor, amount of agricultural sales, where they were selling in the market, and the quantity of ag products sold. So let's look at the primary estimates of the first stage profit models, okay? As you can see here, the log of investment in agriculture and the amount of the trainings received on ag production and financial management increase the likelihood of participating in a market. Whether Anglo acculturation and Spanish acculturation decrease the likelihood of participating in a market. And I'll explain more why that happened. Moving to the stage of to the results of the second stage, which is the extent of market participation. Quantity of acres planted for crops and hay, numbers of employees hired, log of personal and household income, higher labor, and total hours work on the farm per week were significant determinants for the amount of ag products sold. Okay, and Anglo acculturation in this case, and the perception of community disapproval significantly decreased the amount of agricultural products sold. So what can we make out of these results? So on market participation, we saw that the investment in agriculture and training receiving ag and financial management significantly increased the likelihood of market participation. Anglo acculturation challenges, especially in proficiency in both in English and Spanish, significantly decreased the likelihood of market participation. So those farmers that know more English and know more Spanish are spending more time working off the farm in doing other jobs, basically. Moving on to agricultural sales, okay? Numbers of acres planted whether they hired labor or not, along with personal and household incomes, and the numbers of work on the farm significantly contributed to ag sales. And then higher levels of Anglo acculturation, in this case, also significantly decrease the amount of agricultural products also. Okay, those farmers that know more English are going to work off the farm. And as well, that perception of community environment also significantly affected the amount of agricultural products sold. These farmers need to be welcome, okay? They come from a high context culture. They are relational. They have to feel happy and welcome to be able to sell ag products. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to go over them.
Fantastic. And thank you so much, Ervin. Just a reminder to everyone watching online, there's a space for you to add your questions right under the video interface. You can also put them in the group chat and we can grab them from there. So if you have any questions while folks are presenting, please feel free to submit them there. Next up, we have Maria, who will be switching to the sort of consumer demand side of the market.
All right, so good morning, everyone. I've been super impressed with hearing everybody's presentations and loved to get to hear that panel discussion this morning and the research yesterday. Today, we're going to talk about consumer demand for diversity in agriculture. And this is joint work with my two talented colleagues at the University of Illinois Urbana Champaign Department of Ag and Consumer Economics, Jared and Gerald. So I won't go too much into the motivation since you've been hearing from all of these talented people talking about the issues within agriculture, but the gist is that in the US, farming continues to lack racial and ethnic diversity. And we've talked about multiple mechanisms in the last day and a half about ways that we can increase participation, retention, profitability of socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. And most of those tend to focus, rightly so, on policy efforts, extension efforts, other things like that. Today, we're going to talk about sort of an underutilized mechanism of consumer demand. So the first question would be, does ownership matter to consumers? And the really limited research on this exists outside of the ag space. So this is specifically on restaurant demand generally. When Yelp and Google rolled out self-identification labels on their platforms where you could identify that you are a minority owner. So it would say a Black-owned restaurant, a Latinx-owned restaurant, that sort of thing. And there are a few working papers and one published paper that showed that consumers did indeed demand this information. They saw increased foot traffic, increased sales at the restaurants that added this label. It's really hard to study things in this context because first, the data available is completely urban. So most of the samples were really, really large cities. And you can imagine that that might not translate to all consumers across the country. It also was really closely timed with other events that would have made identities more salient. So specifically, Black Lives Matter protests were happening at the exact same time. And then also restaurants got to decide whether they would opt in, which makes it difficult to study whether they were doing other things at the same time. But overall, still promising research that shows that there is some consumer demand for this in the restaurant setting. And then more closely related to our work is there's experimental evidence using restaurant ownership information in Chicago, where they sort of exposed consumers to a Black-owned label or not about a restaurant. Again, this was specifically in an urban setting. So for example, the sample was 75% liberal. And it's also specifically to the restaurant industry. But again, this is really encouraging that we do see that consumers are interested in this information at the restaurant setting. So beyond that, we're also beginning to see some products, especially niche food products, be labeled in stores. And we're actually going to see right after this some experimental work from the very talented Logan Moss. So I won't talk any further about that, and I'll let him share his findings. So the natural question that we might ask is, would this sort of labeling work for agriculture? Would this work in a commodity sort of space? The restaurant industry is quite different from the sale of agricultural products, in particular because it has a local setting. So you have potentially a relationship with the owner, you're investing directly in your community, you have a stronger trust of that information. So we might expect to see this translate more readily to, let's say, a farmer's market where you can see the farmer and you're engaging with the farmer, but we might have a harder time imagining, will this work in a sort of space where you walk into the grocery store and you buy an agricultural product. Also, like I already highlighted, almost all of the research up until this point has been focused in an urban setting. I'll also highlight that the proportion of diverse owners in restaurant industries and other private sectors more broadly compared to farms, they're ahead of us substantially. And then probably don't have to tell the economists in the room, but the other folks, our demand for eating out, our elasticity of demand, how sensitive to price we would be is going to be pretty different for a commodity-like product versus a product like going out to eat. So we do have a little bit of literature that would say that farm ownership matters to consumers. We have quite a bit of literature that shows that we care about geographic attributes. So that's things like local, country of origin, region of origin, and that consumers are willing to pay premiums to support those. We also have one cool paper that looks at veteran-owned labels. So this label, Homegrown by Heroes, run by an NGO. They looked at that in, I believe, Kentucky. I'll have to go back and check that. But they also found that consumers were willing to pay a premium for that ownership identification. So here in this paper and today, what we're going to chat about is, would there be consumer demand for a diverse farmer label? And so specifically, like I said, we were most interested on how this would work on a commodity-like product rather than a branded product. So we focused on strawberries, and in our design, we used a discrete choice experiment. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we varied price systematically, and then we also used the USDA organic label and a fictitious USDA diverse farmer label. For the non-economists in the room, the way that we designed this allows us to make sure that all of these attributes are unrelated. So it means that we can adequately understand their relationship. We can understand if organic and diverse farmer labels would be substitutes or complements, whether you would be willing to pay more if they were together, or whether one would take away from the other. And then also estimate how much we would be willing to pay for either of these labels. So sort of walking you through the design of our experiment, this was online. This is sort of our pilot to sort of prove concept of whether this is possible in a commodity-like product. We first asked demographic questions in particular because we were worried that if we asked demographic questions at the end, participants might not answer as honestly. So we asked for those at the beginning. We engaged in sort of best practices about reducing hypothetical bias. So we told people that it's really important that they answer as honestly as possible. And then half of the people were assigned to an information treatment where we told them about the current lack of racial diversity and ethnic diversity in agriculture today. So this was the exact text that we used. And then they were all asked to answer 16 choice tasks. At the end, they were debriefed and told that this was not a real label, that this is something that we were gauging support for. And then at the end, they were asked several qualitative questions. So as I said, the data was collected online using Qualtrics panels. The sample was recruited to match the US population in terms of sex, age, income, and census region. We had about 1,500 people total, and about equal in the treated and control group for that information. And so we estimate this using the traditional methods for discrete choice experiment, which is to say that we tried to understand how consumers' preferences for the strawberries and their choice of the strawberries was impacted by these labels. So at the bottom here, you can see that DFL stands for diverse farmer label. Then we have organic. Then we have the substitution or complementarity between those two labels. And then finally, we have whether the information affected the diverse farmer label. We also have a separate model that I won't include here where we tested whether the information affected other things, like whether it had an impact on organic, and it doesn't. So we're presenting our preferred model here. And then because we know that consumers are going to have very different feelings about this, we move away from sort of the traditional conditional logit model, and we use something called a random parameter logit model, which allows every single person to have an individual beta. So going back here, for example, it would allow each person to have a different feeling about the diverse farmer label. So following the literature, we estimate this in willingness to pay space. Here are our main results. So the first thing I'll say is for those who are not as familiar with this type of model, the first column here The mean is going to be the average effect across consumers. And then the standard deviation, that second column, that's going to be saying, well, how much difference do we see across consumers? That's going to be a measure of sort of consumer level heterogeneity. So for the diverse farmer label, the first important thing we find is that it's associated with increased willingness to pay by consumers. So about 19 cents premium over a product that was not labeled that way. On the second column, you can see that this is associated with a really wide range of variation across consumers. So the second is in line, before I go to this one, the second, organic, is in line with the literature, which says that consumers are willing to pay more for organic products, and that varies across consumers. Our third shows us that, our third coefficient here, the relationship between the diverse farmer label and organic shows that they would be substitutes. So this would mean that the farmers who would benefit most from this would be non-organic diverse farmers who would use this instead. And you can see that the diverse farmer label is about 29% of the size of the organic premium. So it's a smaller premium than a farmer would get from organic, but a non-organic farmer could benefit more strongly from this. This is also in line, this substitution is also in line with literature that we see on local and regional and other sorts of things like that, where we see that the consumers use the organic label sort of as a wrap up for lots of attributes that they want. And so when other attributes are pulled out, you see a substitution away. And then finally, we do not see an impact of the information. So it appears that participants are relatively aware that this lack of diversity exists, or that the information wasn't, super impactful. We do see significant heterogeneity across consumers, though. So as I just showed you, there's a lot of differences across individuals. And one of the things that this model allows us to do is we can estimate each person's individual coefficient for those variables of interest. And then we can correlate those with demographic characteristics. So in particular, we were interested in political ideology and race and ethnicity. So why race and ethnicity? There's been previous literature that's shown that willingness to pay to support in-groups is higher. So for example, if you are from Missouri, you're willing to pay a higher premium to support farmers in Missouri than if you live in California to support Missouri. Second, so why political ideology? I showed you a little bit of that literature from the restaurant industry. And their results showed that the increase in demand for those restaurants was driven by liberal consumers. Also, so previous work that I've gotten to work on how consumers responded to Aunt Jemima rebranding to Pearl Milling Company, found that these issues that are race-focused have significant political ideology differences. And then I don't have to tell all of the policymakers in the room, agricultural policy often requires bipartisan support to succeed. So getting into those results, I decided not to throw lots of ugly tables at you, but if you are a nerd like me and you want to get into it, send me an email. But here I'm just showing you sort of what we see for consumers in terms of how they responded to the label across political ideology. So the gist of this is that liberal consumers had higher willingness to pay than moderate consumers, which was our comparison group, and conservative consumers had a marginally significant lower willingness to pay than moderate consumers. We also looked at this by race. On the label side, so for the diverse farmer label, Black and Asian consumers were they had significantly higher willingness to pay than white consumers, which was our comparison group. And those who fell in the other category did not have a significantly different willingness to pay compared to white consumers. We left it at these number of groups because eventually we didn't have enough power in terms of the number of participants to talk about other subgroups. But that would be something interesting to explore in the future. So as I mentioned, this is sort of our initial proof of concept that this might work, that consumers might be interested in this in the agricultural space. There are quite a few limitations, so I want to highlight those. So the first and most important is hypothetical bias, meaning that when people are answering these surveys online, they're not having to pony up actual money. So that can mean that these can overinflate the question or the answers that they give. And then social desirability bias, sort of similarly, they might answer a question because they think that makes them look good or that that's the right thing to answer. And then external validity, that would be our concern with, okay, we asked this about strawberries, would this apply to other sorts of products? We're moving into answering those questions and addressing those limitations by extending this project. So first would be we're working on understanding this in the revealed preference space, meaning like actual decision making. So we're in conversations right now with grocery stores to get access to data on sort of information that they provide their consumers, and then understanding actual purchasing and how that affects actual purchasing in the small amount of cases that's actually occurring in the market today. We're also working on experiments where they would be where consumers would actually have to spend money. So that would also reduce hypothetical bias. We're hoping to extend this to additional products to improve that external validity. And we really want to understand more information on, okay, well, we used one particular type of label. How would this extend to multiple identities? You know, here we used the USDA, but would it be different coming from a different source, claim source? Do people care about percent ownership, or, you know, what are they thinking about when they see a label like this? And then also extremely importantly, we're working to take the next steps to understand if a label like this did exist within the agricultural space, would producers be willing to utilize this sort of consumer demand mechanism? Because ultimately, even if consumers are willing to respond to it, if producers aren't willing to use it, it's the point is moot. I won't review the implications with you because we sort of had a condensed timeline here, but I think overall this sort of is initial proof of concept that consumers would care about this on agricultural products, and that U.S. producers could use this as a mechanism to support socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. Glad to take questions. I know lots of you have this up on your computers while you're doing other things, but take a second, throw questions in the chat. I think we're going to answer them at the end. But yeah, thank you so much for being here with me today. Here's another shout out to my amazing co-authors. Yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Maria. That was fantastic. Next up, we have Logan Moss.
Good morning, everybody. As Stephen said, my name is Logan Moss. I am a master's student and graduate research assistant at the University of Arkansas. And today I'm going to present on a similar topic as Maria on consumer willingness to pay for a food product displaying a Black-owned production label. So the motivation for pursuing this research came from a literature review of systemic inequities in the food system. And one thing we really notice is that systemic inequities are well documented. There hasn't been much work done to directly address these inequities and hedge against the challenges that they cause for diverse producers. So when we thought about this, one way that we really considered hedging against these challenges is by enhanced marketing techniques, such as the use of a Black-owned label. As we began thinking about that, we did some market research and asked ourselves the question of, are these labels currently being used in food? So as Maria alluded to, not commonly, but Black imagery is commonly used in food. Texts such as the Black Girl Magic, Rosé on the left, or Master P, if anybody's familiar with 2000s rap music on the right, heavily allude to the fact that these products are owned by African American or Black producers, eliciting a similar response to a Black-owned label. These labels are also used by companies who are not necessarily Black-owned, as you see with Stubbs barbecue sauce. The original founder of Stubbs, Lionel Stubberfield, there on the label. And then we all know about Aunt Jemima, which can create some controversy, as mentioned by Maria. She's done a significant amount of research in that space. So what are the key differences between Black imagery and Black labeling? So we see on the left, the Black man brewing beer. So Black imagery uses texture that socially or his claim and makes it very apparent that the label and the product is Black owned. So the objectives of our study, aligning with this background, is to, one, determine what consumer segments, if any, are willing to pay a price premium for Black-owned food products, and two, to determine if consumer preferences for Black-owned products change depending on product type. Our hypothesis is that certain demographic characteristics may predict the consumer choice of Black-owned products, and that some consumers may be more receptive to Black-owned labeling for specific products, given the ethnic and historical characteristics of food. So to test these hypotheses, we utilized the online survey with the discrete choice experiment to collect data and then analyze the data using a Craig-Hurdle model and a conditional logit. So with our discrete choice experiment, our survey included a discrete choice experiment and additional questions that measure intercultural sensitivity, social desirability of the respondent, and collected demographic information. We'll go into each one of these in depth as we move through the presentation. Data were collected from 3,000 US consumers. We designed the survey on Qualtrics and then administered it on Prolific. Of those 3,000, 1,000 respondents responded to each a choice experiment for barbecue sauce, honey, and beef jerky, so equally distributed across our products. And to qualify for this study, respondents had to be willing to consume one of those three products, and then were routed into the choice experiment for the product they were willing to consume. So when we started thinking about what products to use, we first looked at products which Black entrepreneurs were already producing. We found a significant amount of Black-owned barbecue sauce, such as the Capital City Mambo sauce there, several honey varieties, and also beef jerky. Old Trapper is not a Black-owned beef jerky company. We also included in our product selection some products that marketed locality or a niche product to make sure that our prices and packaging sizes were consistent with the total market. So you see an example of one of our discrete choice experiment questions there on the left. Each respondent received a discrete choice experiment with 12 of these questions. And we see within the questions that the products varied by price, Black-owned, and locality, which was a secondary variable of interest that we included. For the sake of time, I am not going to go into the results for locality today, but I'm happy to share those in the future with anybody that's interested. We, again, use the market research conducted to determine the products to decide a general product size across each of the three product groups, and to quantify three price labels, a low, medium, and high price. The choice experiment was designed to be orthogonal, meaning that across the choice, we were able to elicit the impact of each of these different items on consumer choice. We also included the ISS 15, which is a validated measure of individual dimensions of intercultural sensitivity. We see these 5 dimensions of intercultural sensitivity here, and the respondents were given 15 questions that include a 5-point Likert scale, as you see on the right. They ask questions like, do they enjoy interacting with people from different cultures, which aligns with the engagement aspect of the ISS, and asking questions like, do I avoid situations where I have to deal with culturally distinct people? That aligns with the confidence section of the ISS. So overall, 15 of these questions, 3 questions for each aspect of intercultural sensitivity. and overarchingly allowed us to elicit a rating for each respondent of intercultural sensitivity for each of these 5 items. So to test our hypothesis, I alluded to this, and hypothesis 1 we tested with a Craig-Hurdle model. I'll go a little bit more in depth on that. And hypothesis 2, we utilized a conditional logic to test across the 3 choice experiment groups. So here are our results. This is a big table. Maria said she wouldn't give you ugly tables, but sadly I am today. So these are the results for the Hurdle model, and we'll break this down by each individual aspect of the variables. So stage 1 of the Hurdle model was a binary probit. That was a 0 or 1 Y variable, and the coefficients on that binary probit indicate the likelihood of selecting the black-owned product at least once throughout the choice experiment. And the second stage of the Craig-Hurdle model was a bounded linear model, where the Y was a 1 to 12, and that indicates the total number of selection of a black-owned product. So the first aspect that I really wanted to look at was the generation, and these are in reference to the silent and boomer generations, but we see that younger generations are significantly more likely to select that black-owned product. And then we look at the barbecue sauce choice experiment, especially, where we see a much stronger and positive relationship with the Gen Z selection of black-owned product across binary and linear as compared to the millennial generations. We see that Gen X was insignificant, meaning that there was relatively no effect compared to silent and boomer generations. Next, we look at education, and we see that education did not have a very strong effect on the choice of the black-owned product. Again, high school and less than high school are included in the reference category, and we see people with degrees or professional degrees having not consistently significant differences across the product groups. We do see that with individuals who have a college education, that the binary, meaning they selected jerky once, is positive and significant, and individuals with a professional degree, the honey choice experiment on the linear model was negative and significant. So small impacts there, but overarchingly not a huge impact across education on black-owned choice. Population density is also something that we expected to be highly significant to the choice of black-owned products. The reference category here is suburban, and we see that the only coefficient that is significant here is the linear model for honey, in which urban populations were more likely to select the black-owned product. But overarchingly, again, not a strong relationship when looking at population density on that black-owned choice. Geographic region, another thing that we expected to play a significant role but didn't. We see that the only significant category is a slight negative relationship on the linear model for the honey choice experiment. But again, across that, not a significant amount of variation relative to the Midwest. Race ethnicity, these were some interesting results. So we see when compared to white, that a singular choice, the binary model of choosing at least one black-owned product for black, was not significant, while the linear model was positive and significant. So that means that African-American or black people were more likely to select a product multiple times when compared to white people. And then we see a small negative relationship with Asian populations and Hispanic populations on honey choice. Asian on the linear model and honey, Asian on the linear model and Hispanic on the binary model when related to white populations. Pretty consistent with Maria's findings here, in that political ideology plays a major role in the selection of the black-owned product. We see across the board the coefficients for Republican are negative. Only the coefficients on barbecue sauce were negative, but both the binary and linear model there showed a negative relationship with Republican ideology relative to third-party or independent ideology. And then people who self-selected as a Democrat, you see a strong positive relationship across the board on selection of black-owned choice, with the only exception being the binary model for barbecue sauce. But other than that, we have a positive and statistically significant result across the choice experiment groups in both models. Income plays a pretty critical role. These income levels start with 1 being the base level and increase as the number relative to the variable increases. So we see, it's easy to see with the honey binary model that as income increases, the likelihood of a Black-owned choice also increases. And everywhere that's statistically significant, we see higher income having a positive correlation with Black-owned choice relative to lower income. So when we look at the social desirability and ISS scales, that social desirability is a measure of the respondents making a choice that they deem socially desirable. So we see that insignificant across the board, indicating that within the study, consumers made choices that were consistent with their actual preferences and not their desire to be socially desirable. We see that the ISS, with the exception of the linear model for barbecue, higher intercultural sensitivity correlates with higher likelihood of choice. There, it's a little different given the ISSs across the product group. So we see for barbecue sauce, attention and engagement aspects of the ISS scale tended to have a positive influence, while enjoyment had a slight negative influence. On the honey choice experiment, we see that respect and attention mattered significantly and had a positive relationship with Black-owned choice. And then on the jerky choice experiment, we see that confidence and attention had a positive relationship with Black-owned choice. So here are the conditional logit results. And I mentioned we utilize the conditional logit to test across product groups. That left-hand column is the initial analysis and the right-hand column includes interaction effects. So we see no large and significant differences across products. The reference category there is the beef jerky choice experiment. We do see higher preference for local honey in relation to the Black-owned label and other products. That's likely due to the allergy mitigating properties of local honey and its usefulness during cold and flu season. So some conclusions. The findings of this study, they do indicate that certain demographic groups may be willing to pay more for Black-owned goods. This likely includes younger, higher income, Black and more liberal consumers. Interculturally sensitive consumers are more likely to choose the Black-owned product. There are negative effects associated with conservative, very small negative effects associated with Asian and Hispanic groups, and a small negative effect associated with consumers with higher educational achievement. Aside from honey, there are very little product effects, indicating that a Black-owned label likely has the same effect across various product groups. A few implications. While Black entrepreneurs are likely to continue facing inequity in the food system in the immediate future, there's been significant headway in addressing these challenges. Study like this project and also Maria's offer solutions for Black-owned entrepreneurs to hedge against these inequities and improve their economic outcomes. Strategic marketing could be a possible strong driver in improving these economic outcomes. Again, this is very early preliminary research. I believe that Maria and I are probably the only two people who have conducted research specifically relating to this. So again, too early to draw a direct conclusion, but the results now indicate that there is potential for growth and potential for mitigating properties there. There's still a significant amount of work to be done. These results look promising, and if this conference is any indicator of the people who are working in this space, I'm confident that moving forward, we'll see a bigger body of literature and more work done in that area. So with that, thank you for participating. Again, my name is Logan Moss. If you have any questions about this or want to talk more about it, I'm happy to talk. Please shoot me an email or reach out on LinkedIn. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Logan. That was really great. Now we're going to transition to our fourth presenter, and Lan, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. This is Lan Chen from the Lincoln University of Missouri. Today, I'm going to talk about our series study focusing on the small farms facing tough times in Missouri. Most work done by Yesu from Lincoln University of Missouri and me Yeah. There are a couple interesting story about the small farms recent year, and one of them is about who are feeling a pinch of rising interest rates, and we find some evidence from the small farm in Missouri. As far as we know, the Federal Reserve increased the interest rate a total of 11 times to control ongoing inflation. In January 2024, the interest rate, the Fed fund rate increased by 5.5 percentage points. It is a high rate increase since early 2001. And as expected, the inflation is slowed down. It's about 3% this month. But how about the consequence of interest rates? Theoretically, a rising interest rate have ripple effect. Higher interest rate directly lead to higher cost of borrowing and higher payment for interest expense in the books of the business. And on the other hand, higher interest rate, especially in the inflationary environment, reduce the spending, consumer spending. Customers try to reduce their food or their commodity spending. The effect of interest rate, rising interest rate, is differ across the farmer. For example, with a farm operating with a small profit margin, when a higher interest rate lead to higher cost and their profit become smaller and become maybe less profitable to business. Unfortunately, I mean, in the United States, about 70% small farms have operating the profit margins of less than 10%. So, as you know, you can see that you can imagine that they are very struggling during the rising interest time. In Missouri, our agriculture is very important. It's a very important part. And small farms account for 86% of total farm and contribute 11% the value of agricultural products. And despite the low contribution to the agricultural product, small farms are major producer of beef and soybean. And you can see, sorry, there is a noise outside. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Missouri sees a dramatic growth in the demographic. For example, Missouri ranked second is number of female farmers, farmers with military service, young, new and beginning farmers. And it's curious to know, I mean, amongst smallholders, which are suffering farms. Recently here, I read a paper from the Vox magazine. A farmer named Ben Thomas, a livestock farm. He said that he got a lot of increase in cost because of fertilizer, fuel, and feed. And he even, I mean, the high tech for the beef price is not profitable. And now in the interest increase makes his loan costly and it's very struggling. To measure the impacts of the increased interest rate on individual farm, we asked the farmers three important decisions. Whether they reduce borrowing for farm operation, whether they reduce investment in fixed assets for farming, or whether they reduce or even stop farm expansion. In general, trees measure indicate a low level or contraction of farming business. In the survey, we asked other information about the perception of inflation, risk preference of farmers, and farmer characteristics. Let's move on data collection. We conducted the survey. From the September to December in 2023, and 1,000 we sent a questionnaire to 1,000 farmers by mail, and 200 questionnaire by email. And to increase the quality of the survey and to get a complete answer, we offer $20 Amazon gift card to survey respondent. We end up with 133 responses from small farmers in Missouri who met our criteria, and leading to an average response rate of about 15%. It is a response rate because we got more from the online method. It's about 30%, and we get about 10% from the mail survey. Compared to a recent survey from in California by Duran and his colleagues, he got a response rate about 17%. We totally understand that it is understandable during the COVID time and inflation. Farmers chat and they deny a lot in the survey. So about 17% and 15% is good enough. In this table, I am reporting sample proportion mean on the range of from the 0 to 1 with the standard deviation for categorical variable. For example, we can see the male farmer account for 65% of the sample. Most farmers are white, and they have a high education, about higher education than high school level, about 70%. We asked farmers about the expected inflation, and 73% agree the inflation will increase in next 12 months. And we asked about the risk preferences and about their need to invest or do business in the risky time like inflation environment. About 49% will not agree to invest or do any business. For farm characteristic, majority farms are multi-cropping farm system, and that means they produce more than one livestock, vegetable, livestock, or crop and vegetable and specialty crop. For farming experience, a slight majority farms have, risk experience with more than 20 years of establishment. In terms of profitability, we compare the change from the 2022 to 2020, and the report, based on decrease, unchanged, and increase. And you can see the summer farm not increase during this time. For annual gross sale in 2022, about 37% have a gross sale from the $10,000 to $50,000. And if we count, less than 50,000 is about 57%. That means, the level low, very low sale farm, small farm. In terms of impacts of rising interest rate, this farm, 30% farms reduce investment and fixed assets, and 26% farm reduce borrowing, and 24% reduce farm expansion. Given, the nature of the decision, yes or no, we implement a series of logistic model to predict farmer characteristic associated with the likelihood of doing this decision. This is a variable definition for the individual characteristic. We have a female, we have age, we have race, we have education, we have a rate, expected inflation, we have rate covers preferences. For the operation characteristic, we examine the multi-cropping farm system, farm experience, about the profitability were decreasing in 2020, in the period of 2020 and 22, gross sale of farm income proportion, and where the farm received the government payment in the target time, and the participant in the farmer market, where the farm have a direct sale from the farmer market. We come up with, the given time constraint, I just only present, the best model based on the lowest corrected RKK information criteria. So I focus on the individual characteristic. The negative side for the higher age in the reduced borrowing model. That means young farmers are less likely to are more likely to reduce borrowing. And as expected, farmers with the recovers preferences are more likely to do all three the reducing farm activity: reduce borrowing, reduce investment, and reduce the farm expansion, because for them it's very risky. For the operational characteristic, we found the multi-cropping farm is a negative side for the reduced expansion. That means multi-crop farm are less likely to do this decision. In other words, a single crop farm are more likely to reduce the farm expansion because they got a lot of challenge, financial challenge, and they focus on some effective the business. In terms of farm experience, young beginning farm with about less than 10 years of experience compared to the more than 20 years of experience are less likely to reduce borrowing. And with the we see here the that is also significant with the gross sale in terms of reducing borrowing. I missed a slide here for the sale. That means the lower sale farm are more likely to reduce the borrow. For the farmer market sales, the negative side indicate the farm without participating in farmer markets are more likely to reduce the investment and farm expansion. So based on the estimation, we can answer the question with confidence. What are characters of associating with the likelihood of reduced borrowing, reduced investment, or reduced farm expansion? We can see it is a young or less farming experienced farmers, lower sale farmer, small farm without participating in farmer market. There are some takeaway message. We think, the results is very, very important and interesting to contribute for the government policymaker. For example, we can see young, less experienced farm and lower sale farm are suffering from the rising interest rate, specifically in borrowing new loans from the commercial bank. Because probably commercial bank during the rising interest rate, the fund is very competitive, and young and less farm may be struggling and need help from the government or some government program from the USDA. The second message is that diversity is important key of investing plan for farm expansion in the high interest rate environment. We compare the single crop farm and multi-crop farm. So multi-crop farm have more space to have farmer enter the way become most effective during that time. The third important implication is about the importance of farmer market indirect marketing practice for small farm. We follow up the research. We interview the 4 farmers in farmer market, and all of them have a good financial statement. During inflation time and high inflation and rising interest rate. That means the current policy for farmer market of USDA is very good and very effective for farmers. This is all the implication we got from the study. Thank you for participating, and if you have any comment, feel free to reach me by email or ask me a question. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Lan. So now we have a few minutes for questions. So we did get some in the online chat and a couple that were submitted. So let me just start. I'm going to start off with Ervin. So one question that we received in the chat is USDA data show a small farm gap as Latinx farmers are both less likely to participate, but have higher average USDA payments. Do your findings suggest anything about what might drive this gap?
Well, thank you for that question. So I'd like to start by saying that that was not part of my research questions. And my sample, I used snowballing. So I didn't have a random sample. So I cannot answer these questions based on my research. But I can give an overall view based on what I know about Latinx farmers. To answer this question, I would consider economic, social, and structural issues. Because Latinx farmers are very diverse. You have a few that could be outliers that have a higher productions. They have more knowledge. They are engaged in a market, whereas others are transitioning and they're very small. So I'll have to take into account, access to the information and resources that they have. I already showed that the acculturation of the Spanish and English acculturation are going to decrease the likelihood of market participation, and the English acculturation decreases the likelihood, the amount of agricultural sales. That's for my sample that is not random, okay, and only from Missouri and Michigan. So farm characteristics have to be taken into account. The specificity, economic strategies, policy targeting, and outreach. But this is an excellent question, and I would be looking, and I would like to include it in my upcoming research, looking at non-immigrant farmers with a larger sample size in the South.
Great, thank you. Next, we have a few questions that I think are mostly for Maria and Logan, focused on sort of the consumer research that you both presented. So the first question is whether or not either of your research studies were able to speak to how a diverse farmer who might have had a business outside of the farm, whether or not like having those extra outside activities might have influenced consumer willingness to pay for those products.
An outside business, meaning they make off farm income, or that it's a branded product? Do you have any more information on that?
It just includes like, potentially like an agribusiness. So I think it could be either. I think it's open to sort of interpretation.
Well, I'll definitely let Logan start, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. So we really thought a lot about how to present that difference between imagery and that label. And what we thought about there was providing the information that was produced by a Black entrepreneur without saying explicitly whether or not that's a food business or an agribusiness, because that's up to interpretation of the consumer, right? So when you see that label that says Black owned, right, and that's all it says is Black owned, that's the knowledge that you're presented, is that that's what that product is, that's the attribute that it contains. We left that up to the consumer or the respondent in this case to determine what they thought that meant. We didn't provide information treatment, so we just very vaguely said that this product is Black owned. So I think that could apply to agribusiness or a farmer, depending on how the respondent viewed that label.
Yeah, I would respond similarly. I think the findings sort of indicate that if you're selling a product, a food product, an agricultural product, that you might see a premium. Obviously, it would depend on who your customers are. So I'm not sure, for example, that we would see the same premium like on a seed sales or something else, but that's open to questions in the future and an exciting line of work.
Thanks. Kind of a follow-up question. Can you both maybe talk a little bit more about how you defined the diverse farmer label, or maybe even just like sort of the thought process that went into, choosing what it looked like or what the definition might be?
Yeah, totally. Logan, go ahead and I can follow you.
Yeah, so again, ours had very little definition. So it's whatever the consumer viewed that Black owned, however they interpreted that information. I think that there are a lot of ways to think about what that label would look like in the long run and how it would vary across businesses. But overarchingly, this again is preliminary research, kind of just dipping our toes, so to speak, into this idea and trying to see initially how consumers might respond to that information without thinking too hard into what that information would look like. But definitely room to think more about that and look at different ways to present that information in the future.
Yeah, I think Logan's decision was right on for a processed product because it's very in line with what you would see in the grocery stores on the few products that are including labels. There's not a lot of information. You would have to go to, the person's website and then get more information. So the average consumer making a decision in the grocery store isn't going to see a ton of information. For our label, because it was fictitious and there isn't a good example in the market space yet, we did define all of our attributes. So we also defined what the USDA organic label was before people made their choices, right? So we did define what the USDA diverse farmer label meant in our survey, which was that the label meant that the strawberries were grown on a farm certified by the USDA as Black or African American, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Hispanic or Latino, or Asian or Pacific Islander farmer owned. So we really drew language from the USDA's most conservative definition of socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. We didn't go beyond race or ethnicity in terms of some of the other categories that we've talked about during this conference, but that's one area that would be really interesting to expand, sort of to understand, especially if you have dual identities, right? How those would interact.
Great. Lan, a question for you. Yesterday, we heard a few papers about sort of diversity and credit access, right? And it also included, sort of thoughts about how different types of farms and farmers sort of experience different loan packages. Do you see any of that in your data? Were any of these individuals that you surveyed, were they having sort of mixed experiences with access to loans?
Yeah, I mean one part of result, one of the survey about the reduced borrowing from the commercial bank, and we asked them two questions. The first question about are you impacted by rising the interest rate? And the follow-up question, just click or take or choose any response you made to respond the rising interest rate. And because our sample have a small farm and large farm, but they are very different. And you can see, the result indicate for the reduced borrowing model, the lower sale are less likely to borrow the commercial bank. Yeah, because when the fund become more competitive and they see the very low sale farm as not profitable and difficult to borrow fund for the farm operating loan. So I think it's a very important implication. It doesn't matter about in terms of investment or farm expansion, but for the borrowing from the commercial bank, it's a problem.
Okay, thanks. I guess another question to kind of link a couple of these papers, and maybe Ervin, you can start, would be, do you think that some of these sort of labeling alternatives might help reduce some of the barriers for market entry that some groups might face?
Well, at least on the kind of research that has been done, on my end, I haven't looked at processed products, but I believe that in my research, most of the barriers are going to be reduced by helping these farmers accessing training information that is developed according to their needs and context. Perhaps only a few are processing, but a great majority are producing, non-conventional commodities.
And I guess one sort of follow-up question maybe for Maria and Logan is, anecdotally, right? Like we see like a lot of products often have QR codes now, right? So maybe even like things like strawberries, which can provide you additional information about the product, maybe where it comes from, even down to the farm. How might that sort of I know you had an information treatment, Maria. How might some of that fit into this broader, research program?
Yeah, sure. So I will say first that retailers are increasingly interested in diversifying their suppliers. So that alone, I think can elevate some of sort of supply chain access questions that you're saying here. So we also have the opportunity for farmers to identify themselves through labels, through QR codes, through other things. QR codes generally aren't highly utilized by the average consumer, but social media is, and consumers are increasingly attached to brands in that way, where they have sort of parasocial relationships with the brands that they enjoy, especially ones that they think of as being sort of political action, that they're supporting this for a good reason. So Logan, you probably have more on that since you looked at processed products.
Yeah, so I think with processed products and looking at the consumer side relative to the producer before the farm gate side, I think that any way that we can improve outcomes is a good thing, right? So if this research shows that these labels are effective in marketing, it should increase economic viability of these agribusinesses that are producing processed products. I think that there's been a lot of talk throughout this that when you're talking about issues with the agri-food system, you can't forget one side or the other side of the system. So looking at this, obviously there are issues before the farm gate, but we have to look at ways that the product gets to the final consumer after the farm gate. And I think that labels could potentially have a huge benefit on that in the future.
All right. Well, I think we have exhausted all of the questions. So I just want to take a minute and thank all of the presenters and speakers. We really appreciated you being here and your interest in the conference. And thanks for sharing your really interesting research. For everybody online virtually, we're now going to break for lunch. The networking lounge will also be open. So it's virtual, so you can join us there. And then otherwise, I would invite you all to rejoin us for session 5 at 12:30 p.m. Central.